Can you see me? Probably a little bit. You shouldn't be able to. But you can see me through there because these aren't installed. It's time to put them back into the bike. Welcome to Urban Monk TV. Okay, so in the last episode I did a little bit of a cleanup with the carburetors. As I mentioned in that video, these were not very tarnished or gummed up. They weren't a mess. They're really in quite nice shape. I was riding this bike before. You know, this bike wasn't having troubles running, it was having troubles charging the battery. It really had electrical problems for the most part. So I really didn't expect to find great problems in the carbs, and lo and behold I didn't. But let's get them back into the bike. But before we do, I just want to do a quick shout out to a couple of viewers in Italy. Pietro and his father Riccardo reached out to me through Instagram, shared a photo of themselves working on a Honda CX500. Pietro tells me that his father has owned this bike for at least the last 20 years and that it has not been running. I don't know how long it hasn't been running, but that this video series has, I guess, inspired them to dive in and get the thing back on the road. So here's a photo that Pietro sent me of him and his father working on their CX500. And Pietro, Riccardo, thank you so much for taking the time to send me, send me the photo, send me your story. I really appreciate it. You know, this is a passion for me. It's the worst paying job I've ever had. And so when someone tells me that it's actually helpful, well, that gets me up in the morning on weekends, gets me out here doing more. So I appreciate that, and thank you for watching. Hey, let's get these carbs in. Okay, so obviously the carbs live in here. What's missing is, for the majority, two things. The carb bank, which is just two carbs strung together, with a rail that holds them, and these, you know, what on automotive would be called an intake manifold, but on motorcycles they tend to be called insulators. I don't know where that term came from. It's kind of a strange term, but anyways, the insulator's got to go back on first, and then we can put the carbs in. And then I also have to be careful of this water line. Got to figure out where that goes. I believe up to the radiator cap. Actually, that was incorrect. It's not up to the radiator. It's tucked up here, and this runs to the thermostat housing. So let's get that connected so we can forget about it. Okay. Now I've got these insulators over here on the bench, but I've neglected to clean them up. So let me do a little quick cleanup job. I'm going to use Super Clean. And then for the rubber on here, which is in decent shape, you know, pretty stiff yet, but pliable enough. They should be pretty stiff, even new. I'm just going to, they're not cracked though, is the big deal. I'm going to give them a little bit of a refresh with, you can use either like trim restorer or just pure glycerin is good for rubber parts. Kind of the same thing. My guess is this is glycerin with fragrance, but you know, I don't know. But it does a nice job of refreshing rubber parts. So that makes the rubber look better. Now for this aluminum, You know, if you really want to get this looking great, it's clear coated. You can sand the clear coat completely off, and this will go then with it, and then you can repolish it. Or, you know, if this was like a real full-on heavy-duty restoration where I'm going for museum quality, I might do that. I'm just trying to bring this bike back to life so that it's fun to ride, and you know, not put too much time into it. I am going to turn this bike, and I've decided that you know, I need the money out of this thing, and so I'm going to just use some aluminum polish on this and see what happens. Well, that works pretty good, but I've got more work to do in here, so, but I don't think I'm going to need to really sand it. Anyways, more work to do here and up here. This one came out a bit better. Not perfect. A little bit better. You know, not perfect. I guess I'm not going for perfect here. You guys want to go for perfect? Go for it. And then the next thing I'm going to do before I install these back on the bike is replace these O-rings that seal it against the cylinder head. And you know, I'll get you a size on these, because you don't have to use the Honda part number if you don't want to.
If you like motorcycles, custom builds, or just like a good story about a man's 3-year effort to build a tribute to his childhood teacher, get a copy of Creating Mr. Corton. In it, you'll learn how this man changed this man for the better. How this man took this and built this. How these guys became lifelong friends and enthusiasts of motorcycling and craftsmanship, and how the name Urban Monk originated. It's available from Amazon anywhere in the world that Amazon ships, in both paperback and ebook, or you can purchase through a link found on urbanmonktv.com. Get your copy of Creating Mr. Corton today.
So now I'm going to put the carbs in, and according to the service manual, you know, they don't really show the insulators being out at all, that you can remove the carbs with insulators on and the air box here, and you're just sliding them out. But that's a really tight clearance as I recall, and I'm going to go ahead and put the carbs in and then squeeze my insulators in and bolt them in after. Okay, so carburetors. I want to show what we're going to be hooking up here as far as cables first. You have this lever and then this lever back here. This is throttle, this is choke. And so our choke cable is going to connect to here, and our throttle cables, the pull and the push, are going to connect here. Clearly the pull on this side, because it'll pull up this way and push down this way. You can see there. So anyways, I find this a lot easier to do with the carbs, not mounted in the bike, because you can twist the whole bank of carbs. First, which is my pull and which is my push? Okay. This is my pull. Is that right? Nope. Sorry. This is my pull. Let's see. You gotta come from there.
then grabbing it with my pliers. Every one of these is different. I can bring it up through like that, and then snake it down into place. There it is. Then this goes into here, and I'll just snug that up so that it holds it there and I don't lose that position. I will have to adjust that later, but now that cable will stay in place. Then the other is probably a lot easier because it's right in front. I'll just go ahead and pull him down. Actually, I'll go like this, stick him in place, then slide it up into position. I need more slack here. There. Now I should be able to get you in. Come on. There you go. All right. So there's throttle control. And then back on the other side, this I've got twisted in the middle of those. They both have to go over, I believe. Then there was a holder bracket for this somewhere, correct? Oh yeah, back here. Don't know if you can see that also. Choke comes down through here, and then that mounts right under there. If you can see that. And then the cable sneaks into this guy. You gotta be a little bit of a finger contortionist. Any of you guys that have figured out when you were young men how to undo a bra with one hand just by feel won't have a problem doing this. Oh, I'm gonna get comments about that. Okay, with these hooked up, I can now sneak my carbs in around these boots and over this breather tube. And then I also need to get my stator wires underneath. There. And bring you up. Now, one mistake that I've made is all of these cables run behind this engine mount bracket, which I neglected to catch that, and I'm kind of just going from memory here, which is not necessarily a reliable thing to run by. But no biggie. The engine's mounted in well other places. I can take this bracket off temporarily, put all my cables behind, and put the thing back on, which is what I'm going to do. Conversely, a guy could run those cables behind first and then hook them all up, but I still would argue that doing it this way is easier. Because you can see what you're doing with those cable ends. It would be so difficult with everything behind these brackets and without being able to twist your carbs around. So I kind of think I'm still doing this the smartest way. Okay, so I got the bolts loosened up. Now, while I have that off, I may as well reconnect my breather here. Okay, so correction, this breather tube, take it out for now, because that can go in later. because it is just getting in our way. And what we can do is start to put the carbs into the air boots, lining them up on both sides. There. There. I'm going to go ahead and tighten up these clamps now on the air box, these insulators to the carbs. I start by getting them super loose, but not to the point where the screw comes completely out. And then of course orient this with the head of the screw outward, and we can snug these up. Okay, same thing on the other side. These are the fuel petcock valve vacuum and supply line. There is also a line right here which is an overflow for the fuel petcock, so that will come out and reach the fuel petcock on the tank, so that's for later. And then we just want to get this choke cable kind of adjusted in a way to where it's snug in this clamp. Let me show that. This clamp right here, we want to get the cable snug, but we want to take up this slack here so that we have, you know, a good feel on our choke knob. Although frankly, here I'm pulling on it, you know, that little bit of slack isn't the end of the world on the choke. There, it's totally pulled. So let me get this guy clamped down. And then I just want to make sure that, yeah, that's returning all the way to off. You don't want it where this is set so that you're partially choked all the time. When you put choke completely off, you want it off, or in this case, you know, open, if that makes sense. Then I think it'd be a good time now to put this airbox breather tube back into place, and it sneaks up right through the middle of the carbs and hooks up to this T right here. So it is helpful to have this engine mount bracket off of here. Okay, and then I'll just put the clamp back in position. There, it's on. And then you connect the other end down here on the air box. And that's it for that breather tube. Underneath the carbs we have these little drain tubes. I'm going to have to get a pliers for that clamp. These are kind of funny little clamps to work with. There we go. Again, they only come into play if you have an overflow, like a float and needle valve that's not connecting, or seating and fuel's just flowing endlessly. Then, you know, fuel actually pours out on the ground and not all over your engine. So before I start putting things further together here, there's one last thing I want to check, and that is the throttle. While these throttle, how do I point to that? While these can be adjusted with everything put back together, they're a little finicky to get at, both the pull and the push, as I call it, which is behind that water pump hose to the thermostat. But essentially, when I have the throttle completely returned to, you know, call it off, call it your idle position, but all the way clockwise. I want to make sure that my throttle is actually all the way closed, and so I'm checking that. One of the ways is to hear the contact of that rotating piece to the body of the carb. It makes a little bit of a click. The other thing I can see is slack in that cable up here when I go to clockwise on the throttle. When I go like this, you see the slack up here in the cable there. So I know, you know, I'm all the way back to 0. If I'm not, make adjustments now while it's easy to get at. So time to put my engine mount bracket back. I'm going to start with this back hole, and then I want both of these vacuum lines running through there to the fuel petcock. So all 3 of these go to the fuel petcock, and then just make sure you've got enough, whoops, slack there, and this guy goes through to the other side. And then the bracket on the other side. Alright. Okay, so these are going to mount on the bike in this orientation, so I want to put this clamp on first, then work this in carefully to the carb, which is so making sure that I keep this O-ring in place. But it is going. There we go. But getting that O-ring in place is going to be critical. You know, you could see why they might suggest you put these on before the carbs go in, but gosh, it's going to be so tight otherwise. Okay, so I've finagled that with a little screwdriver and then a big screwdriver, just prying on this area where it doesn't matter. It's not a sealing surface. And I've got my O-ring in the slot all the way around. A little tricky. Just fiddle with it. And then my bolts. And what's helpful for this is a ratcheting 8mm wrench. It's just hard to get in here otherwise. Just snug. You can feel it bottom out at some point, and just feel when you're putting torque on the nut and not making any more movement with the insulator. And then we can tighten up our clamp. Same thing, other side. Oops, let me get these out of there. Okay, so this helps me really press it in here, essentially, is where I'm working for now. And then just back to making sure I finesse my O-ring into position well. There, now it bottomed out, and I just put a little torque on it. There it bottomed out. Good. You could, even with a wrench like this, you could crack that if you wanted to, so be careful. And tighten our clamp. So just one last thing I want to show you to complete this job. I'm not putting the fuel tank on yet because I've got some tuning to do, but I want to show fully how to connect the carburetors. So the other place they have to be connected is to the petcock valve at the bottom of the tank. Let me just show you how that goes. On the right side, this guy comes right here. That will hook up to this nipple on the vacuum diaphragm of the petcock. That brings vacuum from the engine intake to open this up and allow fuel to flow. This other small tube, which may or may not run through here, I'll figure that out when I put the tank on. Maybe you want to run that around on this side. I don't know. This guy is just a drain tube that goes down to the bottom of the bike in that cluster, and that hooks up right here to this nipple at the side of the vacuum diaphragm. So that's just an overflow if things don't go, if there's a damage to this or if it leaks. But you know, in a normal course of business, it should not do that. And finally, on the fuel rail, there's a T here, hooks up right here, comes out to this tube to here, which is kind of obvious. Whoop, got gas in there. So that's putting the carburetors back into the CX500. Hey, if you guys like motorcycles, check out Creating Mr. Corton, my memoir of the build of my Suzuki GS550, and how I bought my first CX500. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you'd like to become an urban monk. Thanks for watching.